falls from your eyes and brushes past your cheeks. It effortlessly falls to the ground of Mother Earth as she embraces you and recognizes that you are divine presence from Creator Source, that declares that you are now fully ready to be encoded with Source's love, as you are fully connected with your divine cries to embody the divine feminine essence that resides within you. Have you ever noticed that crying, especially when you are no longer a child, seems to have this stigma around it? So we shall delve deep into why is it that currently there is such a stigma around crying. But first we shall seek to define what crying itself is in simpler terms. Crying is a deep emotional or energetic release that shows a divine language of the soul in facilitating healing or expressing overwhelming feeling, as it is a deep connection to the divine or something profound that shows oneness to source and to all. Now you may see that when someone cries, they shed away tears. And so these tears is simply being that release chamber from our eyes, creating space to provide inner peace and welcoming such a connection with source, oneself, and each other. Ultimately, we see that crying itself is showing us that we are tapping into our divine feminine essence, encoded in the frequency of source and our creator that is fully connected to the divine masculine. But it is a way to open up each and every one of our hearts to show that we are simply just like source, tapping into our emotional essence and going into that release chamber of our emotional body to now release either what no longer serves us, or as the definition states, even to show a sense of healing and welcoming some inner peace. There are even cases where we cry when we are in a frequency of joy. The key word here being overwhelming feelings, emotional feelings. So crying does not always mean that it's because of being sad. It could also be the alternative of being in a state of bliss and joy. So we shall go into an in-depth discussion as to why it is that in our current society and civilization that we often look at crying with such a stigma, especially if you're not an infant or a child. So why is it that so many of you are embarrassed of crying? Or maybe, you know, especially as an adult, there's such a stigma around crying. So let's go in-depthly into crying itself. Crying taps into our emotional body, which is one of our subtle bodies. Outside of our physical body, what makes us wholesome? We of course have our mental bodies, and we go on to have emotional and connection to source, getting into our bliss state. We see that one of the first things that a baby does when it is birthed into this world is cry. And most of the time, the mother giving birth eventually starts crying, not out of a state of sadness, but out of a state of bliss. So we see that crying could have so many different reasonings behind it. But most people equate crying to being in a state of sadness. Now, as we discussed earlier, crying stems from having this overwhelming feeling of needing to release those overwhelming feelings. For many, I think many have been conditioned to think that crying is more about being in a sad state. But I shall share with you that ever since I was a kid, I recognized that many times when I'm in a great state of bliss, especially great state of laughter, that I start shedding tears. So this overwhelming emotion of bliss that I feel within me just effortlessly allows me to flow with these tears that, it may not resort to a state of crying where you're sobbing, but it's another form of emotional release. So why is it that so many adult beings, I've recognized that there have been moments in my life where, I just have to tap into that divine feminine essence within me. And maybe before I did not fully connect it to recognize that as part of Source, we both have this twofold parts within us, divine feminine and divine masculine, that shows us that we are in fact a replica of Source. But I will just, maybe through processing certain overwhelming feelings, be it, as you might say, sadness, and many times when I'm in a state of joy and bliss, just effortlessly shedding those tears or crying, or my way of releasing those overwhelming feelings in my own way. And I've recognized that it has been such a healing space for me. And so I've noticed that many people around me may now show a sense of uncomfortability that, wow, as an adult, you're actually crying? Shouldn't crying be left for the kids or the infants or the babies? Why is it that you're crying? You see, in our current society and civilization, I should say, we are now being conditioned to step away from this divine feminine essence that resides within each and every one of us, which I think is such, yeah, it's just really something that we should stray away from, because that's what makes us fully complete in being a replica of our Creator itself. We, both as men and women, have this essence within us, that may not be seen in the physical, but it is something that lives within our subtle bodies, or emotional and mental body. The mental going forward more into the masculine aspect of ourselves. And so we should not be so uncomfortable with tapping into this feminine essence of crying. Stop allowing society to tell us that there should be a stigma around crying if we're not a child. This is just an effortless way of not just connecting to Source, but releasing those overwhelming feelings that most of the time remains in our subtle emotional body, and if not dealt with, can form, as they always say, dis-ease causes disease. So if you don't release those unwarranted emotions, eventually you will see it show up in your life in some other way through some ailments or illness. So I want to now focus on men. Often seeing crying as something that, wow, they have to stray away from. So let me give you my own example of, my father. Me just, having a discussion with him one day when I was growing up, because I remember he was a school teacher and he would always resort to his way of discipline from what he knows from his parents, you know, as a way of, doing like certain like beatings, as a form of discipline, because that's what he's used to. So me always going into my state of crying to release those emotions, asked him one day, I've never seen you cry. Do you ever cry? And he, of course, goes back and tells me that he has not cried since he was the age 11 because of his own ancestral lineage of his own father, you know, giving him what we call a beating. And in those days, in that generation, when they beat you, they would, of course, tell you that you should not cry, or if you did cry, maybe louder, or like you maybe just in your own state releasing it, they will even hit you more. And so this created this numbness within my own dad, and he, of course, decided that from the age 11, he just stopped crying. So my question is, where is all his emotions going to? What I'm seeing is a pattern of young men and boys being conditioned to not cry, to not tap into that divine feminine essence that resides within each and every one of us. As we see that, this release chamber from our eyes when we shed tears and we cry is actually a form of healing. As I even stated before, that if you don't release those unwarranted emotions, it eventually forms diseases. So we see that, wow, crying is in fact good for us. And so many young men are developing this state of mind where they feel like, they will be looked at in a certain way, like, oh, they're not tough, as men are always being told to be tough and have tough skin and, not show their emotions. But we are seeing like, wow, it is time that we step away from this stigma and continue to remain fully connected with both essences that resides within us. Just like even if you're a male, you being born like the presence of having your mother and having your father, you would say two opposites, but you are being provided with your needs, whether it's your mom being that nurturer and your father just being that provider. So we see that within each and every one of us, we have to continue to have this presence continue to just flow out of us effortlessly. And if that means that you need to release an emotion, whether it's in public, you go there and you cry. You not be so uncomfortable, because what I always say, something like crying should just be like you wake up in the morning, you go to the bathroom, maybe you pee, another release chamber, maybe you brush your teeth, maybe you eat or you drink water. Crying should now be seen as a basic need in the body, as a way to release. And there should no longer be a stigma, be it being a man or even for some adult women who do not want to tap into the divine feminine essence. Understand that it is so cathartic when you go into that state. You now feel so one with source. You now feel so complete. You now feel like, wow, I've released this great weight over my shoulder. And for those who are like me, when we are often in a state of joy, have you ever seen people when they're maybe in a religious institution and they're in their praise session, that they just go into this flow state where they effortlessly cry, not out of a state of sadness, but to them they are connected to God in that moment and they're connected to source, and they just feel these overwhelming feelings take over them and they burst into their tears, they're crying, they're sobbing. So please understand that it is necessary for you to cry. Crying should not end at age 10 or age 5 or age 11 or age 6. Crying should continue on throughout the rest of your life. And be it that you cry in public, both male and female, there should be no stigma. So research have in fact now proven that biologically crying is in fact good for us. So just as I stated before, the basic need of releasing and urinating or peeing, on a daily basis. You drink anything, water, juice, milk, whatever it is, liquid substance that you put into your body, you have to release it. Or if you don't release it, you have that uncomfortable feeling inside of you like it has to be released. Well, so too, as we shall now see, the necessity of crying. Crying and peeing are connected as they've been noted to be like release areas for our body. So they have been connected to release stress hormones and cortisol from our bodies. You see, they are actually like the release chambers within our body that allows us to release toxins from our body. Crying, in fact, have also been noted to help us recover and provide these feel-good hormones like oxytocin and endorphins. So, in fact, when we release, we are in fact connecting with our nervous system or parasystematic nervous system that allows us to provide those good hormones within our body, but also acts through our tear ducts and, as I've stated before, through our peeing state or urination state, actually release those toxins or those stress producing hormones like cortisol from our bodies. And if not released, then you see that, of course, it goes into the pathway of creating ailments within our body. We also have biologically connected crying as also a pathway to also lowering our blood pressure, and also just being that connector to connecting to our heart. So we see on a physical, biological level that crying is simply necessary. There are so many, just from our tears and the release state from crying, that we are now just as we are, it's almost like breathing in and breathing out. As you are releasing those toxins and bad hormones from your body, you're now taking in and providing your body with this sustenance of good endorphins and hormones that are actually good for your body, helping you release your blood pressure and connecting you with your heart. Of course, that's also another language of connecting to source. You see, the divine feminine essence shows us that we are fully connected with our heart. Now, we also see that crying is also a spiritual connection. providing recovery for us, providing healing through us. So we see that crying is actually a language of our soul, just wanting to connect it to our creator source, just effortlessly tapping into our heart space and connecting to source. Now, you may see that crying just being that expression. And sometimes it's not just about your divine masculine, your divine feminine, it's also about even flowing into your divine masculine. Because when you now release and you have this heart essence, you are now flowing into being clear, flowing into just being in a state of mind or a mentality that wow, being a divine masculine, wanting to go out into the world and to present itself in a state of consciousness, processing, maybe just day-to-day things in the world, maybe communicating with others, maybe going out to work, maybe just having a conversation with somebody. So we see that it's a divine connector, not just to source, not just to clearing and transmuting, processing stuff within ourselves and connecting to oneself, but eventually just connecting to each other. So don't shy away from crying. Step away from having this stigma of crying. It is now time that we go back to just being ourselves, our divine selves, being one with source, feeling comfortable expressing ourselves on a multi-dimensional level in so many ways. Not having to cry in private, but if it means that you have to shed some tears in public, go there. Tap into your essence, your divine feminine essence, and shed those tears. Be it that you're in a state of bliss, be it that you're in a state of sadness. I guarantee you that a lot of times when you're sad and you cry, you feel better. So, continue to cry freely and do not let anyone tell you that crying should not be something that you should do. Get comfortable with yourself again and stop having this unnecessary stigma of crying as an adult, and even conditioning children to not cry, to have this tough skin. There are times when we need to have, or toughness or tough skin, I should say, but there are times when you just need to just be in your state of your emotional essence where you just flow into whatever you feel at that time. I guarantee you it will be a healing moment for you. So continue to cry freely and do not let anyone tell you otherwise.